Okay, so we're on to lesson 3. We're going to be covering the bass clef. Remember, we are just at the point of defining some of these musical notation elements before we actually start to decode music. And this is the equivalent to your kids learning, to identify their letters. So this is an A, this is a B, maybe even letters sound slightly, but we want it to become really easy and automatic and sort of brainless, just very automatic before we actually get to reading. So let's get started. Okay, so we're going to start by reviewing what we've learned. Remember that we learned that there's a musical staff and that the staff is composed of 5 lines and 4 spaces. We count those from the bottom to the top. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines and 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces. If we wanted to write at this point just an X instead of a note head on space 1, we would want to fill out the area between line 1 and 2. That would be a space note, or in this case, an X for now, on space 1. And then if we wanted to do a line note on line 4, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, and we'd want to draw that X right over top of line 4. We also learned that we have something called a treble clef. The clef will always be found at the leftmost side of the staff. And the treble clef can also be called a G clef. Remember that line 2 is the most important line when we're talking about a treble clef. And we will start there if we're drawing it. Bump up to line 3, down to line 1, up and around, crossing back over and down. And the reason this gets the name of G clef is because all this action around line 2 is helping us identify that this is where X marks the spot. And if we were to write a note right there on line 2, it would be given the letter name G, and it would be assigned the pitch that is that corresponds to this symbol. From there, we can figure out all the other letter names that are going to be on the staff and even above and below it, just because we now have this code. So again, this is called a treble clef or G clef. All right, so moving on to lesson 3, bass clef. Another clef sign which can be placed at the beginning of the staff is called the bass clef. The bass clef looks like this. And the bass clef is also known as the F clef. Again, they're going to get into how to draw it, so we're just going to go over, first of all, why it's called the F clef. So remember that I said a clef, whether treble, bass, tenor, or alto clef, they all kind of have a code embedded into them where they are centered around one specific line or space on the staff that help us to identify that as a specific pitch, and from there we can decode everyone else. So in this case, bass clef, also called the F clef. So check out how it starts on line 4. And now we have these 2 dots that surround line 4. Guess what? X marks the spot. So this note is going to be called an F. And from there, we'll be able to decode all the other pitches on the staff. So let's try drawing this. Okay, so we're back to our manuscript paper, sometimes called staff paper. And we had our treble clef up here. Down here, we're going to write the bass clef. I don't think I mentioned this earlier. A bass clef is typically used for male voices. Also, that's the cello's primary clef. And a lot of the lower brass instruments, let's say, would be in bass clef. And of course, the left hand of the piano is in bass clef. So it's a useful clef for reading lower pitches. So we started on line 4, we bump up. It always looks to me like half of a heart. So that's why I tell my students, draw half of a heart. Bump up to line 5, down, and we stop just around line 2, a little bit past it usually. And then we draw the 2 little dots, one in space 4, one in space 3. Again, these 3 spots help to mark this as an F. That's why this is called either bass clef or F clef, right? And that's why this is called either treble clef or G clef. Okay, we'll draw a couple more bass clefs. So remember, we start on line 4, bump up, draw half a heart, and try to stop around line 2, a little bit past it. 1 dot on space 4, 1 dot on space 3, and a note head placed right there on line 4 is going to be called an F. All the other pitches will be able to be decoded from there. One last time. Line 4, bump up and around half a heart, space 4, space 3, and here's our F.